to all the participants, Dr. Vinay Chandra Banavati. Dr. Vinay Chandra is the director of Indica Yoga, a platform that offers authentic, immersive, and transformative yoga experiences. Uh, and Dr. Vinay Chandra holds a PhD from Pondicherry University, and his area of research is psychological insights in the Vedas. To his credit, he has 4 master's degrees in Sanskrit, English, yogic sciences, and applied psychology. Dr. Vinay Chandra is a dedicated teacher who travels all over the world conducting courses, lectures, and workshops on a unique blend of yoga, psychology, and Sanskrit. His publications include a report on standardization of yoga terminologies for the World Health Organization. He has written a book, or actually co-edited a book with Dr. Anuradha Chaudhary titled Perspectives on Indian Psychology, published by the Jain University Press, and another book co-authored titled Happiness, Indic Perspectives, published by Development Foundation. He also has, to his credit, several articles, papers, booklets on yoga, Indian psychology, culture, and spirituality. So we have today a very highly qualified and highly committed speaker who would be speaking to us on a subject which may appear to be esoteric, but I'm sure that he's going to make it very clear. He's going to talk to us on Kriya Yoga, which is a very important part of the Patanjali Yoga Sutras and the ancient Indian yoga tradition as such. So, Dr. Vinay Chandra, over to you. Thank you.
Namaste and thank you, Krishna Phaniji. In fact, it's an honor to be introduced by Krishna Phaniji, who himself is a great scholar. So I was telling him just before we started this session, one should really muster courage to speak on Yoga Sutra when Krishna Phaniji is there. But I'll take this as a test that any youngster would need to offer in front of his seniors and teachers who can really guide them on this path. So before we commence, maybe we could have a brief pause, a short meditation, and then we start. In fact, today is a very special day. It's the Gita Jayanti, Vaikuntha Ekadashi, and also Christmas. And if you look at the significance, I mean, they're significant in terms of religious traditions, they're significant in terms of what they can offer in the spiritual life of one's individual. Vaikuntha Ekadashi marks the waking up of Lord Vishnu in the Indian Hindu tradition, which is the beginning of a day, and a day is filled with light. Similarly, the Gita Upadesha, Gita Jayanti is marked on the occasion on which Gita was taught, or the message of Gita was given to Arjuna. Again, a special day where there's so much of light coming our way. And similarly, in the Christian tradition, it marks the birth of Jesus Christ, who was the harbinger of light, love, and peace to earth. So in this way, this is definitely more than a coincidence that we have all the 3 significant events falling on this day, and also having this talk on Kriya Yoga as a master key of self-transformation. So we will prepare ourselves for this discussion to unfold in front of us, and we'll do that by a brief pause. So I would request all of you to sit down, settle down in a comfortable way, bringing all activities to rest. And once you're comfortable, you may gently close your eyes. Ensure your back is straight, your back, neck, and head aligned. Now gently bring your awareness towards your breath. Be observant of what is happening. Don't intervene, don't change, just witness as the air enters in through your nostrils, goes in and comes out. Observe the pace, the quality. Notice whether it is short, whether it is long, whether it's balanced, whether it's rhythmic or disturbed. Just observe. It doesn't matter how it is. What is important is to know how it is. Just take note. Let that thought pass even, and then focus on deepening your breath. Inhale as much as you can, filling up your lungs. And as you exhale, evacuate it completely. Next time when you inhale, be open, be receptive to all that is good coming your way, all that is positive entering in. And as you exhale, get rid of any burden, anything that weighs you down. Just let that pass out. Next time, inhale deeply, and as you exhale, chant the sound of Om. Inhale. Allow the vibrations of Om to spread throughout your body, reaching every corner, reaching every cell, and preparing you for this special occasion. Opening up to receive the grace that marks this special day. With a sense of gratitude, rubbing your palms, you may gently place it on your eyes and move your hands around. And when you feel you are ready, you may gently open your eyes. I see many friends have joined in, so I thank you all and welcome you all for this session. Today we'll be looking into a very special part of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. Patanjali's Yoga Sutra may not read a detailed introduction as most of you would be familiar with. So I will refrain myself uh, by not going into the details. However, it is a very important text, and those who are part or aware of the yoga tradition would know its significance. If not, it's definitely another occasion to explore the text per se in detail. But what we'll be looking into is something that has direct relevance to our day-to-day living. Just to give you a brief introduction, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra contains 4 chapters and the text has about 195 or 196 sutras. Sutras are short statements where the entire teaching of the tradition has been presented in a cryptic, to a certain extent, a cryptic manner, but something that is very clear too if you understand or if you know how to understand and read them. Sutra means a string. So the entire text opens up like a string. When you unfold it, each idea being woven into the next and leading to the other one. And in between, this is the technique of the sutra literature where a minor loop is formed to explain something that is related or something that is incidental in nature. While continuing the original idea from beginning to the end, minor loops come in, the discussion happens, and then you come back to the original idea and continue forward what you have been discussing. So this is how Sutra literature unfolds in front of us. Without again going to the detail, let me just say the beauty of Sutra literature can be really experienced when you read Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. Right from the first sutra, Atha Yoga Anushasanam, up to the last sutra of the 4th chapter, you can see how, in a beautiful manner, a fine tapestry extends itself, bringing in various graceful patterns to its fold, various colors, various hues, and finally at the end, building a rich and varied yet meaningful tapestry in front of us. So that's the beauty of Yoga Sutra. And in the second chapter, the very beginning of the second chapter, we come across this idea of Kriya Yoga. So that's what we will be looking into today. In the first chapter, he discusses, among various things, the nature of samadhi. In simple words, the higher states of consciousness. How can one attain it? What could be the possible obstacles in this path? How do you overcome them? So all those discussions take place. In fact, it starts with the very second sutra when he says, Yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is nothing but the cessation of the modifications of the mind. So then it becomes incumbent on him to explain these concepts. Okay, the word vritti is used. So what are the vrittis? How do they function? Nirodha has been used. Nirodha is stopping or gaining mastery. So how do you gain mastery? Couple of sutras come in that context. Then he needs to say what happens when you gain mastery. A few sutras come in that context. And while discussing how do you attain it, there are few more sutras. So in this way, it keeps on unfolding from one sutra to the other. But it largely appears for a beginner fine. I mean, I understand what you're saying. It's almost like a beginner's prayer to Patanjali, asking, fine, I mean, I appreciate, I respect what you're saying, but still, as a beginner, how would you like to guide me? Patanjali anticipates this question, and that's why the second chapter takes a new turn. And that whole second chapter is called as Sadhana Pada, the path of practice. While, of course, the first chapter is also highly practically oriented, yet you can see the second chapter is not bothered about philosophical aspects, the philosophical dimensions, though it is very much embedded into the thought there, yet the main focus, the primary attention is given to how does a beginner has to step in, where does he need to make the first move. In fact, in the bhashya, in the commentary, Vyasacharya makes it very clear. He says there are 5 levels in which we all of us operate. They are called as chitta bhumi. Bhumi is the level of the mind in which we operate. It's the level of consciousness with which we engage with the world. If I use these terms, you might wonder what do I mean by levels of consciousness? But if we look at our own experiences, again, I want to make it very clear, these are not something that is far away from our experience. This is highly or very closely related to our day-to-day living and day-to-day experience. It falls in the experiential realm. I have seen myself engaging with the world at times, and the outcomes have been, it's been smooth, it's been very productive, it's been helpful mutually for myself and for the others with whom I'm engaged. But there are also occasions where it's conflicting, the engagement is conflicting, it's painful, it's heavy, and at the end, it has left me with a lot of burden on myself, perhaps a similar experience to the other person also. What has made a difference here in both these situations? It's nothing but the levels of consciousness with which we have engaged ourselves at that moment or at that event. And everything is an outcome of that. Patanjali says, or Vyasa says, Patanjali assumes it, Vyasa explains it. He says, there are 5 levels of our operation, starting from Kshipta, where it's a highly disturbed state. Then comes in Moodha, disturbed yet morbid. It's dull, lack of awareness, lack of light in whatever is being done. Then comes Vikshipta, where the mind is disturbed, yet occasionally it can focus itself. There is light flashing now and then, though it is not continually present, it happens once in a while. So these are the initial 3 states. Vyasa makes it clear that yoga is not possible for the first 3 steps or first 3 levels. It's only at the interface between the third and the fourth, or only when one person finds oneself at the third level, then there is a greater possibility of yoga to happen. And what he means by that is yoga is a conscious movement towards growth. So that is possible from third level onwards. Keeping that in mind, Vyasa says the second chapter begins keeping the person who is at the third level, who is at the Vyuthita Chitta or Vikshipta Chitta, which is nothing but most of us. Often we find ourselves in this situation. It's not that we are completely tamasic in nature or completely rajasic in nature. We see the interplay of these qualities, and from time to time, we can also gather ourselves, get ourselves aligned. This is the Vikshipta state. Arjuna was also in the Vikshipta state. Okay, that's why of all the other Vikshiptas, perhaps he was a little more prepared. Therefore, Gita, the Upadesh of the Gita, the teaching of the Gita was given to him. So, in that context, we see the second chapter unfolding, where Patanjali anticipates the student asking, fine, I heard you speaking about Samadhi, the higher states of consciousness, but can you be a little more compassionate towards me? I have not yet reached that level. Can you just step down a little bit and walk me through this difficult path? So, anticipating this question, Patanjali drops this first sutra, the beginning of the second chapter. He says, Tapas Swadhyaya Ishvara Pranidhanani Kriya Yoga. Fine, we have discussed about yoga. Yoga is nothing but samadhi in the first chapter. But where do I begin is my question, to which Patanjali says, fine, for you now, yoga of action, Kriya Yoga, yoga in its practical terms is being explained. And what is that? The combination of these 3, tapas, swadhyaya, and Ishvara pranidhana. We'll see what tapas is. We'll see what swadhyaya means. We'll also see what is Ishvara pranidhana. And in the next sutra, so the combined practice of all the 3, tapas, swadhyaya, and Ishvara pranidhana, is given a technical name called Kriya Yoga. And we should also know that this is the classical Kriya Yoga and different from what we are familiar today or what we might have heard today of a particular tradition, which is also called as Kriya Yoga tradition. In the Babaji tradition, you have a practice called Kriya Yoga. So that is a specific set of practices put together and it's been given a name Kriya Yoga. So that is a different practice, or rather, that is something of a more recent origin. And what we are referring to here is something that belongs to the classical tradition, which can be attributed to Patanjali. In fact, many scholars believe that this is a unique contribution of Patanjali, while Ashtanga Yoga could be something that he might have gathered, which was available at his time. If you have to really pinpoint to a very unique contribution of Patanjali in the Yoga Sutra, then that is Kriya Yoga. This is the opinion of a few scholars, but keeping the scholastic views aside, coming back here, before looking into the details of Kriya Yoga, I want you to see the second sutra there. It says, after defining what Kriya Yoga, Patanjali says, it has two purposes. It serves two purposes. And that is very important for us in this discussion. It says, what is it? Samadhi bhavanartha. Of course, this contributes, this aids in attaining samadhi, which is a common generic goal of any practice in yoga. If we see about Ishwar Pranidhana earlier, he said, Tataf Pratyak Chetanadhigamaha. Even just Ishwar Pranidhana alone can lead to awareness about one's own self, but also the secondary purpose, or perhaps at that point, the primary purpose is to overcome the obstacles. So everywhere, whenever he states a practice, he immediately gives us what is the purpose served with this practice. And the second sutra of the second chapter highlights this aspect. First one, it says, Samadhi Bhavana, it's to reach the higher state of consciousness. Again, that's a generic goal, so we will not bother ourselves with that. But what is important there is the second part. He says, Klesha Tanu Karanarthascha. This practice particularly helps to thin down the kleshas. Tanu means thinning down. You reduce its volume size, whatever you want to call, attenuation, bring it down, narrow it down to that extent where it can almost become non-existent. Okay, so that is Tanu Karana. And he has also introduced a technical term, Klesha. So Klesha Tanu Karana, thinning down of the Kleshas. So naturally, for any learner, now the curiosity is, what are the Kleshas? Right? Then he goes on listing what are the kleshas. Again, I don't want to go in detail because each one of the kleshas demands a thorough inquiry to understand it. So keeping the details aside, I just want you to know he enlists 5 kleshas that operate. Asmita, the first one is avidya, which is ignorance. And from that ignorance emerges the egoistic tendencies, that is asmita. And then from there, raga, dvesha, and abhinivesha. Raga is this inability to extricate oneself from what one is attached to. That is raga, going behind it. Dvesha is a strong, intense aversion from something or towards something. And the last one is abhinivesha. Abhinivesha can be understood at many levels, but for the time being, fear, and especially fear of non-existence. So these are the 5 levels in which kleshas operate. You might be wondering, what do we do with these technical details and all? But yeah, we'll come back to them shortly. So the kleshas are something that actually are present and operate in all of us. And that is why Patanjali, he says, the Kriya Yoga serves two purposes, Samadhi and Klesha Tanu Karana. And this gives us the link towards our title, That is Kriya Yoga, Master Key for Self-Transformation. Now we'll start with this question. Why are we looking for transformation? Why is that we find a need for transformation? Maybe you can also share your responses in the chat box. So why is that there is a need for a transformation? Why can't we continue to be the way we are? Why is that? Why is there a seeking? Is it necessary, or is it just a burden thrown at us and without being aware we are just hooked on to it? Yeah, feel free to share. But if you look into the way things happen, we always notice that our ability to operate, our ability to engage is highly limited. So what do I mean by it? There is one way of operating where the space I have in front of me, the sphere of activity can be highly reduced, or there could also be a position where it can be quite large. Yes, I can see some responses. So looking for permanent happiness, conflict scheme seems to cause stress, chaos, frustration, and create suffering. We want to find happiness, sense of self-improvement. Yes, these are the reasons why we would want to grow, right? There is a feeling that we are limited. So from that limited sense of being, limited sense of operation, we need to expand our scope. And that is the reason why transformation has to happen, or we feel like happening. Otherwise, it's just running around the mill, or as we have been discussing in other sessions, it is going in loops, endless loops. In fact, that is the name that our ancestors have given, samsara, for this worldly engagement. The engagement which happens in an unconscious manner without any awareness, that is samsara. It's samyak sarati, it keeps on running. An endless loop has been formed, and we go on doing it, participating in it in a conditional existence. So we, at some point of the other, we realize that we live in a conditional existence, and from this conditional existence, we need to move forward. So that's where Arjuna finds himself, in a conditional existence. So that is one level. And the other level, you have Krishna, an expansive existence. So this movement from the Arjunahood to the Krishnahood, that is the call of transformation. Each one has the potential of Krishnahood. So, but we find ourselves often in the Arjuna level, and there are many times, in fact, for a long period of time, we just are caught in that superficial attraction that we don't even know we have this conditional existence. That's what in the Abhinivesha, while describing Abhinivesha, Patanjali says, Swarasavahi. So we find ourselves so well gelled into the situation that we are enjoying this intoxication. And it happens, he says, Vidushaha api, even for the wise, even for the so-called wise, they get intoxicated. So many of us keep on running in this mill. It's only at some point, and largely slow, when there are painful events in our life, that we pause, slow down, and just have a more reflective look into what is happening. It's only then we realize, what am I doing? Why am I doing in this way? I've been living this pattern for such a long time. Perhaps now is the time when I can come out of it. So when this realization happens, then the journey begins, and Kriya Yoga marks that journey, and therefore, or Kriya Yoga enables the journey from Arjunahood to Krishnahood, and therefore it is the master key for transformation. And how does it do it? It identifies three important factors which actually holds us back to Arjunahood. So if I ask you this question, what binds us to this conditional existence? What would be your answer? Maybe we can go on with a long list, but if you have to identify the crux of it, or just a few of the most important factors that bind us to this limited, helpless, conditional existence, then what would you identify them as? Yeah, someone says raga, that is attachment, fine. Fear, emotions, and ambitions, okay. Indriyas, yeah, okay. Desires, good. Tendencies, good. Deep rooted learned habits, very good. So, fine. Maybe I'll start with this. So, Patanjali looks at all these causes which binds, and then he shortlists three of them. And he says the first thing that binds us is habits, patterns. This is something that is really calls for our attention. We might have lived, or we might have an experience of 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years in whatever we are doing, yet we might just be continuing in the same old way, same old pattern, repeating something often and again in an endless manner. I'm sure you'd be able to recognize people around your own circle who have these tendencies. But they were saying of Immanuel Kant, a great philosopher who was living in Konzenberg. So people could almost set their clocks looking at him. Okay. So if it was a noon time, or it was in the evening, or whatever, if when he was taking a walk, when he was walking home, or whatever, looking at that, people could actually set their watches, it seems. I mean, they could. So that is a typical clock-like way that many of us function. Okay, there is a trigger. We have got triggered with every repeated presentation of the trigger in front of us. So similarly, the patterns have been operating on us in a completely shrouded manner. We are not even aware that they exist. Okay, a fear or an anger that was there in me 10 years ago, the trigger has not come, but the same trigger appears in front of me after 20 years, and you will start wondering when that anger comes out. I mean, where was this? Where did I hide this for all this 10 years or 20 years? I didn't even imagine that I had this inside in me. Okay, but it happens. Most of us would have gone through that situation, and that is an old pattern. Okay, so pattern habits are one of the biggest or the first obstacles that bind us. So this is one. And the second one, what Patanjali identifies, is lack of awareness. The pattern exists is good, is one thing, but whether I'm aware of it or not is the second thing. Okay, the second one is complete lack of awareness of that pattern. That is the second important factor. So the first one now gets a little more complicated with the presence of the second one. An old, deeply hidden pattern is there, and I'm not even aware of it. And now the third factor, it gets multiplied by it. The first two, they get added, but the second with the third one, it gets multiplied. And what is it? The third factor is the egoistic tendency, or the sense that I can solve even without knowing what the problem is, even without knowing how to deal with it, but the need to solve it, or even the other way around, where I find myself helpless to solve it. Both are problematic. Okay, and that is the third one. So first one is an old pattern, a deeply rooted, seated pattern. Second, lack of awareness. And third, a strong egoistic tendency. So these are the three most powerful factors that hold us from any transformation, any growth. Patanjali identifies this, and as a solution to this issue, he provides us with the three practices: tapas, swadhyaya, and ishvara pranidhana, each one attempting at the root of the cause. The first one is tapas. Okay, what is tapas? Generally, we see whenever the word is used, you see a person with a matted hair and a long beard sitting beneath a tree and meditating, or even sometimes getting into extreme asceticism, standing on one leg, or standing with one hand raised, or standing outside in the sun, or lying down on a bed of thorns. These are the general depictions that we come across whenever you use the word tapas or tapasvi. Okay, so one who is performing the tapas, one who is involved in the tapas is a tapasvi. Okay, that's how you understand the word tapasvi. And in fact, if you look into the tradition, much before the word yoga and yogi were popular, the most common word was tapasvi. So tapasvi is used almost as a synonymous to yogi. Okay, so this might give you an idea that, okay, getting into extreme practice of asceticism is what we are speaking or what we are looking into as tapas. No, the manifestation could be manifold, but that is not what we mean by tapas here. Tapas literally means, okay, the word in Sanskrit literally means to generate heat. Okay, tapa is again another word that you come across in the Yoga Sutra in a couple of other contexts. Tapa or tapas, where fire or heat. Okay, that is the meaning of the word tapas. So what involves this fire, what involves this kind of heat in it, is such practice is tapas. And what is it here in this context? Any conscious practice which will help us to overcome our deep negative patterns is a tapas. Tapas is that heat which will actually cut the old existing pattern. You really need that escape velocity to move out, right? If you really want to fly in the sky, what they say is that you need a minimum speed, and that is called as escape velocity. Only when you have that escape velocity, you will be able to break from the gravitational pull. So what gives that escape velocity? According to Patanjali, it is that tapas, it is that intense conscious practice, which can manifest in many ways. We'll look into some of them, which can manifest in many ways. That practice is tapas. And that is the most important, or the first thing that is necessary to overcome the gravitational pull of older tendencies, older negative holding back or the limiting tendencies which bind us. If we have to cut ourselves from it, then the tapas is required. So how do we go about it? Again, before coming to the actual or the practices broken to a smaller level, we'll just look into the approaches of the tapas. So tapas involves endurance. Any practice which calls for endurance is tapas. Any, any activity or any practice that is either voluntarily taken up or thrown at us because of circumstance, if we are capable of enduring it, then that itself can be tapas. For example, they say in the tradition, Vyadhistak paramam tapaha. Vyadhi, even a physical illness, which is not in our hands to a large extent, that itself can be tapas when endured. And in fact, that they say that can burn the karma fastest. So if I know to endure my pain, if I can find the meaning in my suffering, then that also can be transformed into tapas. This is what is actually happening to me. But apart from that, there are many practices I can take up, which is a voluntarily decided action, a conscious action. We need to connect back to what Patanjali says while defining abhyasa. He says, Dirghakala, Nairantarya, and Satkara Sevita. So Dirghakala is something done over a long time, Nairantarya done with consistency, and Satkara Sevita done with intense goodwill or a faith that it is definitely going to be helpful to me at the end. So any conscious practice that is undertaken, you decide that I will do something for 21 days. I need to lose my weight. I will have a particular kind of regime for next 21 days. That can be tapas. It's not necessary that one has to undergo a self-mortification. That might be there incidentally, but that is not the purpose of tapas. The purpose of tapas is very clear. Can I break my old pattern? If I have been doing something in a particular way, and if I feel that that needs to be overcome, can I have a better practice which replaces this? Can I either withhold something by which there is an intense focus is generated, and that focus will help me to get out of the situation? Maybe an example would be helpful. Some of you might have watched this movie Chichore. I watched it very recently. Again, it's a movie of a few college friends who were living in a hostel, and that hostel was known for losing every match or every sport. Okay, and there were other hostels which had the habit of winning them, and these were habitual losers. So, and then there are a set of motivated guys there, youngsters, who finally decide that we should do something to win, to erase this blame on our hostel. And they try it out, and initially when they try, there's very little success that they gain. And once when they're having a meeting, then they just somehow collectively get this idea that uh, maybe we should withhold from whatever we like to do often. So one is very fond of drinking, one is in love with someone, one has the habit of cursing the other. So each one has a different tendency. Okay, and they all collectively decide that whatever might be the situation, we will not do what we would like to do so dearly. So that withholding is also form of a tapas, where you're holding the dissipation of that energy, and that causes some kind of positive frustration. You know, when you withhold something, when you endure something, there is a sort of frustration that happens, and that frustration at this moment actually is a creative frustration. There's a lot of heat that gets generated, heat in many levels, at the psychological level, at the physical level, and it could be also at the spiritual level. And that heat is nothing but tapas, and that tapas becomes absolutely necessary for the ripening to happen. I mean, when does a fruit come out of a tree? Only when it is ripe. And what is the most essential feature that is required for the ripening? It's nothing but the heat. Anything that has not undergone the heat process, that will not stay long, that will not have that energy. And tapas is exactly this practice, which is either forced on you or voluntarily chosen, which generates this heat, and that heat can bring about that transformation or that ripening. Therefore, tapas is the first important element. In order for tapas to act upon, what is most necessary is something that is so easily palpable in each of us, that is human will, right? Human will is something that we can really, of all the other factors that we find ourselves with, human will is one such strong instrument that we can easily grasp hold of. Therefore, Patanjali uses this to provide this as the first solution, or the first practice, tapas. So that's why even symbolically we use the words like fire to refer to human will. In fact, if you look into the Vedas, in the Rig Veda especially, you have various hymns addressed to Agni, and Agni there at one level you can look it up as the divine force, or a physical fire, but largely you can note it to be the human will, and in unput downable human will, right? That is the nature of fire, right? how much ever you put it down, it burns upward. And that's actually a symbolic direction for the human will, that always it needs to gather itself and lift up. And that practice which uses the capacity of the human will and builds on it is the practice of tapas, and which is the first of the three, that is Kriya Yoga. And second comes, while you activate the human will, while a lot of focus is brought on the, of course, it also involves building up one's ego strength, because with ego there is a lot of strength. It is not necessarily negative in nature. So you gather yourself using the ego, but if there is a lack of awareness, that could be problematic. Therefore, the immediate next practice is Swadhyaya. Swadhyaya is generally understood as reading of scriptures, or those texts or those literature which will help you gather yourself. Fine, that is at one level, but even the ultimate purpose of all these scriptures and literatures, I'm now going a little bit faster. So the purpose of all this literature and scripture is nothing but to help you to reflect on your own self, to develop that quality of awareness. So while the will is developing, there's also need to have a mirror to see in which direction it is moving. It's not enough just to have the will fully put up. We have seen the tendencies of the Rakshasas, whose will is also highly gathered. Okay, they're also, their energy is channeled, very well channelized, but towards what end and in which direction is a big question. And therefore, Swadhyaya, a practice which allows you to develop greater awareness about one's own being and behaving, becomes very important. That's where Swadhyaya comes in. Swa Adhyaya. Swa is self. Okay. Adhyaya, reading it, knowing it, understanding it. All the scriptures are the kind of pointers towards the reflection that needs to happen. It's not about just reading something, memorizing something. I might know 196 sutras by heart, but it's of no use unless it allows me to do some self-reflective work. I know a few friends, what they do is they just take a part of the Upanishad, not even one whole mantra, but just one line of the Upanishad, and spend a couple of days reflecting upon it. In fact, that is the potential of each one of the part of the Upanishad. That's how much light they can bring in. Okay. So the purpose of the scripture is also to help us bring in light into our own internal space. And that is what Swadhyaya does. So now the will is awakened. There is an active mirror which is showing towards which direction the will is working. And now is the high time when we really need to call for a greater force, or the grace of a greater force that is in action. It is, there is a requirement for humility and acceptance, and that's where Ishvara Pranidhana comes in. Okay. Okay, before going to that, I want you to know that while the first one acts upon the human will, the second one acts upon the human mind, the capacity, the cognitive capacity, right? To know, to understand. That's where Swadhyaya comes in. And the third one is, it uses the principle of heart and the emotion, where you actually realize that there is a greater force which is even beyond my limited nature and sense. And as an honor, as an acceptance, you just open up for that grace to receive it, to just allow it unfold itself around you. And that's where Ishvara Pranidhana comes in, which acts upon the human element of emotion and heart. So you're using all the three main instruments: will, the mind, and the heart, which are the powerful instruments that we possess as human beings. Okay. So Ishvara Pranidhana is this submission to this higher force, to that greater intelligence which operates behind and beyond our control. So being open to it, so that the awakened will is not a, is is not a sort of an opaque wall that it has created for itself, but something that is transparent, which allows the inner light to flow, right? If you are familiar with the David star, or the way Sri Aurobindo puts it in that form of the star, Sri Aurobindo says that when the human will is ready, that's the triangle with the base below and a pointer upward. When that is ready, there is also the divine descent that is happening. The divine is even more eager to help this individual to make this transformation, to make this transit from a conditional existence to a larger existence. And that capacity to be receptive, to be open to receive that grace, that is Ishvara Pranidhana, where the upper triangle is just coming down to connect with the lower triangle. And that's where the beautiful star emerges, the bright star, the transformation happens. And this, the coming together of all the three practices, tapas, swadhyaya, and Ishwar Pranidhana, is Kriya Yoga. And when all the three are present, in anything that we do, one can combine, I mean, they are not separate activities. If you take an asana, you can actually practice all the three in an asana. Tapas, holding in a position, enduring it, okay? And there are many other aspects to it also. And then swadhyaya, knowing what is happening at your physical level, knowing what is happening to your emotional level, knowing what is happening to your mind when you hold yourself in that position. That is swadhyaya. And then the act of letting go. In fact, that's how Patanjali defines asana when he says sthiram sukham. Sthiram is holding, sukham is letting go. Okay, when you let go and just become a vessel of something else that is beautifully emerging in your inner space, that is Ishvara Pranidhana. So every practice, asana practice, or anything, it may be cooking, it might be walking, anything that we can do can be an occasion for practice of Kriya Yoga, and that can lead to the transformation which is so much desired for. And therefore, this Kriya Yoga is a master key for the transformation that awaits us. And with this, I'll conclude. Yeah, at the end, I had to rush through because of the time, but if there are any questions related to this, we can take up and discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Vinay Chandra, for putting it so beautifully. I think for a real practitioner, this 45 minutes talk of yours is sufficient. You don't need to have the whole study of the yogas, yoga sutras in all their details. That would be a more intellectual or scholastic approach to it. But from a very practical point of view, you have given us such beautiful insights into it. And I really like the three aspects which you have brought, to our notice, of being stuck in a pattern and being unaware of things that are happening. And the whole thing is complicated, or as you rightly put it, is multiplied manifold times by our own egoistic tendencies, which thinks that it knows and it can act in its own way and has an independent existence of its own. I think that is really wonderful.